Today's gospel, and a very long gospel at that, tells us about a man who had been born blind and that Jesus cured him and gave him his sight. The gospel also tells us about some people that were spiritually blind. He and the disciples walked into town, and there was the man blind from birth. And the disciples walk right by him. And then they talk about the man born blind, but they don't talk to him. That was very insensitive, wasn't it? We try, to the best of our ability, to be sensitive to the needs of people around us. And when people have special needs, we try as best we can to respond to those needs. In the design and the building of our church, which will be 8 years old this Easter Vigil, we tried as best we could to take into consideration the special needs of people. We put in some parking places for people with disabilities to be closer to the doors. We put a button at the doorway that opens those doors automatically. The floors are flat. The aisles are wide. There's extra space for people in wheelchairs or with walkers or crutches or canes. For people that might have a difficulty hearing, our ushers can present a sound mate, a little packet with an earbud, so you can hear me loud and clear. We wanted the church to be accessible. Although there are steps here in the sanctuary, there are ramps either side, and a ramp at the area by the Blessed Sacrament. We want everyone to know that they are welcome here, and that God is made accessible to us, and we want you to be accessible to His family. But in today's gospel, those disciples were quite insensitive to the man who had been blind from birth. Not talking to him, but talking about him to Jesus. And their comments were full of judgment. They said to Jesus, "Who has sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus says, nobody sinned. His being born blind is not a consequence of somebody's personal sin. It's an event of nature. And I have come with my divine power, and I'm going to heal him. And Jesus does. He heals that man who had been born blind, and he did it with personal care and with personal sensitivity. Jesus comes to us in our spiritual blindness to open our eyes with His light to how God sees our world and to how God gives us a place and responsibilities in this world. Then the people brought him to the Jewish leaders. And some of the Jewish leaders were not all that happy about that cure of the man who had been blind from birth. Now, if you heard about somebody that had been cured, wouldn't you jump for joy and rejoice that somebody who had been blind now sees for the very first time? Why were some of the leaders upset? Because Jesus had cured this man on the Sabbath. For heaven's sake. They were upset because Jesus cured him on the Sabbath. Now, before we get too harsh with these Jewish officials, I think sometimes we do the same thing. We want God's blessing upon everybody. However, there are certain people that when they seem to be blessed by God, we can think, oh, for heaven's sake, how could they get that? They certainly don't deserve it, meaning they don't deserve it as much as I think I do. What a judgment. And yet Jesus went out to that man and cured him. He was asked by the Jewish officials, you know, the man who cured you must have been a sinner. He's not in our company. What can you tell us about him? Who was he? And the man answers with a line that we quote every time we sing Amazing Grace. All I know is, I once was blind, but now I see. And the Jewish officials threw him out of the temple. Here was the happiest day in this man's life. The very first time that he was able to see anything. And they throw him out of the synagogue. He used to be isolated by his disability of blindness. Now he can see, and he's isolated from the synagogue by the hardness of the Jewish leaders' hearts. And once again, Jesus goes out to him. And he says to him, do you believe in the Son of Man? And the cured man says, well, who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? And Jesus says, I am he, the one speaking with you. I am he. And the gospel says, the man who had been cured of his blindness knelt down and says, I believe, and worshiped the Christ. Jesus had worked a double miracle here. He cured that man of his physical blindness. He also cured him of his spiritual blindness. He believed in Jesus, the Christ.